Joining me today, we have Maija Mickols, AI Product Manager at Docebo, and Josh Penzell, Head of Custom AI Solutions here at ELB Learning. We are so excited to have them, and without further ado, I will let them take it away.
Morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. Oh, it's great seeing so many people say where they're coming from. On behalf of Maija and myself, welcome. Man, Maija, we've got an international crowd today.
I love it, just like me.
Yeah. So as Stephanie said, I'm Josh Penzell. I'm VP of AI Solutions at ELB Learning, and I'm based in Seattle, Washington. Pronouns he, him. Maija.
My name is Maija Mickols. I'm the AI Product Manager at Docebo, and I'm here out of Puerto Rico.
Awesome. And I hope everyone was listening to how you pronounce, it's not, I always say Docebo, but it's Docebo.
Docebo is how I pronounce it. We accept many pronunciations. There are some preferred.
You answer to many. Cool. Well, y'all, we have so much to talk about today, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started on this webinar, Beyond Content Creation Using AI to Measure Learning Success. And I think we're both really excited and passionate about this subject. So let's just get right into it. Some of the things we're going to discuss today. First, we're going to talk about the limits of measuring knowledge. We talk about knowledge transfer so much, right? And as we'll see, we think with AI coming on board, and even just in general, there's so much more to measure and so much more we should measure. And we'll not only talk about that, but we'll talk about, how effective are the measurements we're doing today. Next, we'll talk about the roles of AI in learning. And we mean roles actually literally, right? How does AI fit into our learning experiences, and how can we design learning experiences for this generative AI world? And how should we think about and conceptualize, right, using AI? From there, we'll talk about evolving from content creation and from content delivery to learning experience design, which is that term, right? LXDs we hear all over the place. But what do we really mean? And I think this will relate to the roles in e-learning and, get to how we can think of this new way of measuring stuff. And then we'll talk about a new paradigm for measuring success. We'll talk about how these AI-driven metrics and these AI-driven roles merge together, right, to allow us as learning and development professionals or human behavior engineers, or your term du jour, right, how it really allows us to prove the ROI of what we're doing. And of course, we'll end this with some tactical, practical examples of things you can be doing immediately, like right now, to prepare for this onslaught of generative AI, which we are super excited about. Maija, is there anything you want to add at the top of sort of our discussion today? Anything that we should be keeping in mind as we go through this?
I think what you pointed out at the end is important. We're going to tell a story today that's kind of a future-facing story. We want to help people visualize where things can go, and we're going to help you identify first steps if you haven't taken them already. So that's the thing I'd keep in mind. There's a story, and then there's first steps.
What you learn from the story, right? The moral. Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about, how we measure stuff today. And I think if I mention the name Kirkpatrick and Kirkpatrick levels of evaluation, super familiar. I think it's been around since 1959, right? And as a reminder, we have these 4 levels of evaluation. The first one is reaction, which sometimes we used to call smile sheets in our live facilitation, right? Did I like or did I not like what I was going through? The second one is learning, knowledge transfer, right? Are we seeing the results of that learning represented in maybe assessments or quizzes? And by the way, we'll focus somewhat on e-learning today just because of the AI nature of stuff. But as we go through it, I think you'll very quickly see how this really creates and can involve sort of your ILT or your live trainings as well. So we'll talk about level 2, and then level 3, behavior, right? Are we seeing those behavior changes in the workplace? Because, I often say training doesn't matter. The results from training matter, right? And those behaviors are some of those results we want to see. But of course, level 4, those real results, return on investment, right? Are those behaviors the ones that we want to see? And I started looking into some research around this. And obviously, research can be a very interesting thing, and different studies can say different things. But you would assume, and I've always assumed, that these 4 levels correlate, right? Meaning if we look at them from a statistical point of view, I'm going to see that level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, there's correlation. If I like it, I'm going to learn it. If I learn it, right, I'm going to change my behaviors. If my behaviors change, I'm going to see results. And maybe surprising to both Maija and myself, when we started digging into the research, we learned that actually this is not the case at all. Right? There is actually not a correlation between all of these. Now, that doesn't mean there's not a correlation between some. It doesn't mean the model is completely broken. But I'd like you to guess, and maybe we can throw it in the chat, and I'll try popping it open here. Out of all of these, there's actually one that doesn't correlate to any of the others, right? Meaning like it does so, we would assume level 1 correlates to 2, to 3, to 4. We'd assume 2 goes to 1, 3, and 4. So there is one of these that actually doesn't at all correlate to any of the others in several studies that we went through. Everyone's throwing in, I see reaction, I see results, I see behavior, reaction. A lot of people are going to reaction. Ben's saying learning. Chris is saying learning. We have a bunch of these. Okay, this is the part where I hope you don't say heresy, right? Get out of here. How dare you? But actually, the results from the research, and you'll see the research studies up here, show that learning, the knowledge, does not have any correlation to the other ones. Now, we know this intuitively, right? Because just passing a quiz doesn't mean you're going to change your behavior. But just looking at these 4 things, when they looked at them, there were weak correlations and moderate correlations, but not a single one correlated to knowledge. Meaning, I can pass the quiz, but that had no bearing on whether my behavior changed and whether I saw the results. I can like the training, and that actually does have some correlation to the behavior and the results, right? If I change my behavior, there are going to be some results. But most of these correlations were actually weak, meaning that though they were statistically significant, they weren't very big. There was one relationship here that was actually the strongest of all of them. Which do you think it is? Do you think that it was reaction and behavior, reaction and results, or behavior and results? Which one do you think would be the strongest correlation? Behavior to results, reaction, behavior, awesome. Behavior, results, behavior, and results. All right, again, some of you are getting it right, but I think this is going to surprise a ton of people. The strongest correlation was, boom, reaction to behavior. Meaning if you liked it, you liked the training, you were more likely to change your behavior. Now, again, does this mean that knowledge transfer is completely invalid? No, right? We know that we need all sorts of reinforcement, and we need to go through Gainey's, right? 12 levels of learning, or is that right? 12? Maybe it's 13. I think it's 12, right? In order to make sure things happen. But this shocked us, because what it tells us is the model, right? 9 levels of learning. Thanks, Leslie. I knew I was adding a few others in there that weren't right? First of all, I will just say, if you're doing gamification and you're doing things that increase engagement, awesome. Like, actually, that's probably changing some behaviors. So good, keep going down that, right? And if you're using tools, right, and you're using platforms like Docebo I'm going to say Docebo because that's what I've always said. Okay, I hope that's okay. Then you're good to go. But this also means we need to think differently about what's missing here. What is this box that we need to replace this with? Because if we're not measuring the knowledge, the assessment, the quiz, if that can't correlate to the behavior, well then, like, what are we doing? We're learning and development, folks. Literally, learning is in the name. And we want behaviors, right? So as an example, I thought it would be interesting. Let's look at one of the most widely used sort of metric capture systems, right? In just about every e-learning, SCORM. And as we look at this, and Maija, feel free to jump in here because I'm sure people are getting bored of hearing my loud booming voice and they'd love to hear something that's that, you know, sometimes my passion I've heard comes across as yelling. So apologies, right? But we have, I thought it was interesting. We sort of, these broke into two different categories, right? So we have stuff like completion status and success status. So did I go through the entire coursework? Did I succeed in passing, right? Was there a success metric and did I pass it? At what level, the score, did I pass it by? Was it 70%, 90%? And then how, if we think about completion and objective progress, right? Am I hitting the objectives in between or the modules? And then we looked at, and we see that there are these other metrics. Time. How much time did I spend in the course? How much time did I spend total, including pauses? How much time did I spend independently with each of these different sort of moments? Interactions. We know we try to make interactive training. So where are people clicking? How are they doing? What are the results of that? Session time. So the amount of time is spent in certain sessions. Bookmarks, right? What am I bookmarking or what am I saying is most important perhaps for later recall, or where do I pause so that we can go back? So just a function of, you know, what I need. And then learner preferences, which are sort of captured in these learner profiles, which I want you to think about for a bit, right? Because that sort of is your, I don't want to say your social security number or your identifier or your address, but there's something in there that links you uniquely to everything else, right?
It's your identity as a learner and everything that we know about you that doesn't fit into one of these other categories, right? What makes you you?
Right. And then if that makes you you, and we have tools like AI, how can we begin to leverage that, right? And so this led us to say, you know what we're looking at shouldn't be so much necessarily what you're learning only, but we need to look closer at how you're learning it. How long did it take? What are you clicking, right? And so we propose maybe level 2 version 1, right? Or 2.1 here. Instead of just looking at what you've learned or the knowledge, maybe we can look at how you're learning it. What I'm terming here, and let's not get into semantics, learning or learner behaviors. Some of those things on the bottom there in SCORM, but with AI, we're going to be able to dig a lot deeper into that. I think, Maija, you have some exciting stuff to talk about there, right?
Yeah. So with AI, we're basically leveling up what we can do with existing data points to a degree. So I'm going to introduce some different angles that we can look at data because I get really excited about data. The more accurate data we have and the more types of data we have, the richer our interpretations can be and the more thoughtful they can be. So we have pedagogical data. So this is anything that's focused on the pedagogical frameworks, anything that's defining a relationship between the learning aims and potentially behaviors. You've got linguistic data, which is something that's kind of exciting that's come into things and become more possible with the integrations of generative AI and large language models. So this is key. This is basically how we figure out what the language looks like that people are interacting with, either through generation on the system side or through learner input. And we can gain a lot of linguistic data out of that that may not have been previously accessible. We've also got the interaction data that Josh talked about before, how things are learned. And I want us to think about what is learning and how things are learned as kind of something that needs to be connected together. We previously may have been focusing on what was learned. Now we can engage with how things were learned. That's possible right now, and many of us have access to that information. But AI has the processing ability to help us connect those two things together to answer broader and more important questions about learning. So along with the user data, this gives us a real big opportunity to map out exactly what we want to know, what decisions we're trying to make with it, and empower ourselves and our systems to do better.
Yeah, and we're already getting some questions in, and one is like interaction data captured via heat maps, right?
Yeah.
And it makes me, and I think that's one way we can do it, and reminds me, right? And you were talking about this, Maija, yesterday when we talked. None of this is necessarily new to overall research. I
Right.
mean, you had a great story. You worked in linguistics. You have a linguistics background, and you were
Yeah,
saying something about language learning. Could you just share that for a second?
Sure. So one of the things that we look at in language learning research is eye tracking studies. So we're taking a look, especially in an e-learning context. And so when you talk about heat maps, that's exactly the type of thing that you can get from eye tracking data, which maybe we don't all have access to right now, but we can start to think about that. And then these large calculations and correlations that used to be required to be done by a statistics department so that people could publish papers suddenly become accessible to the masses. And this is just a huge thing that I'm seeing shift from research, things that I was looking at to make decisions from a theoretical level. I now have the ability to essentially run those same experiments myself, gather that same data, and make the same level of decision that I didn't have access to before.
Right. And I think, even if we don't have access to this yet, we know this is coming. And so
Oh,
I
yeah.
think the important thing here is to start thinking about, if that's coming, what does that mean for us today so we're prepared for it tomorrow? How can we be designing today for it tomorrow? And I mean, this is the way, length of time you're looking at something, I believe, is the way you measure the ability, language learning in like babies and stuff, right? Or what they're paying attention to. It's the only thing you
Right.
have. I know grocery stores have looked at it for where to place something, right? I remember when Google Glass came out. I still have my Google Glass, one of those cool things that had this camera pointing at you. And I remember, we would all talk about the real magic there was that it can track your eye. Like, that's so cool. And I think about Vision Pro and some of these things and just stuff in there that might not even be, we're not even looking at yet,
Absolutely.
So super exciting. And then some examples of this, Maija, right? Here's an example. And I think I'd love for you to walk through this and talk through,
Yeah.
what kind of data can you grab from something as simple as a multiple response quiz?
Right. So here we have an item that was generated by AI. It is a multiple choice question with multiple responses. What we're able to glean from just this one interaction that a learner might have is we are going to know what the complexity of the item language was, and we can correlate that to the complexity of the language, maybe in an input module or something like that. So that we're making sure that we're generating good content that is appropriate for the learners and keeps them in the same mindset. We've got bias detection. So this is something that we can run as part of like a generative AI product, or this is something that we could look at when we publish something. We can kind of run a bias measure and take a look at items that may not be unbiased the way we're looking for. We've got pedagogical and interaction data. And so what I talked about here before was taking a look at a combination of what's learned and behaviors. So here we know the assessment intent of the item that was necessary to generate it in the first place. So we've got that information that can be tagged to all of the behaviors and interactions that happen with this one activity. The other really cool thing is we can kind of track a thinking process here through a combination of some of these metrics. So we've got click events, options selected, sequence of the options selected, changes after initial selection, time for each selection, time to submit the answer. These are all things that answer the question, how did the learner process this question? Did they find it confusing? Was it a challenging question for them? And did they come to the right conclusion in the end? Or did they have the right idea before, second guess themselves, and go down a different pathway? Both of those pieces of information are really important for us to have, right? If one or the other happens. And then we also have the ability to take a look at item analysis, like might have been used in standardized testing, just from a quality perspective, taking a look at the performance of different items and the ability for this question, for example, to differentiate between somebody who has successfully learned or achieved a certain thing and somebody who hasn't.
Yeah, and what I love is we're starting to see these two, I don't know, I see Venn diagrams in my head, these sort of, right? One is the model getting better, so the learning itself getting better. You were talking
Yes.
about, is the question itself a valid indicator of what you're trying to teach? And you can
Yes.
look at that, but you're also saying it's not just what you're answering, it's how you're answering it. So how long did it take me to answer it? Which ones do I click? Do I click and unclick, right? Is the order interesting, right? I could even see an A/B test where the content is different before
yeah.
this, right?
Yeah.
And now you're seeing how stuff sort of gets there. And so what I love about this is just in even something simple today that we've already created, there's going to be so many more ways to measure that. And someone was asking, how could I do this in a live event, right? If I don't have a computer. And I'd love to hear your thought on that, Maija, but one thought that came to me is, and you still have to use some technology, but I think about, we have a Jeopardy game, right, through the training arcade. And not only is it measuring how quickly you answer the question through your phone or whatever, right? But it's all, I'm sorry, did you answer the question or what the question is, but it's the time it took you to answer it, right? And so I start to think about that as being now a metric I can look at and look at trends over time if I start to have that data, right? What do you have any ideas about that? I mean, you've run studies in the live environment without fancy cameras and all sorts of stuff, which I know is coming and it's going to be cheaper. But any other thoughts on like a live environment?
Yeah, I mean, to go to your idea about cameras, I'm just going to throw this out there. If we not only record from the learner's perspective in a live event, maybe this is recorded because it needs to be distributed later or it's being simulcast.
Yeah.
We could also have a camera pointing in the opposite direction. So one of the things we can start to take a look at is engagement, and we can use some available tools. I don't want to mention any specifically because the space is not something that I'm tracking, frankly. But taking a look at recorded video analysis from the speaker's perspective could give tons of insight.
Yeah, and if you're hearing screaming in the background, it is just my kids, just FYI. So it's nothing to be worried about. And I also it occurs to me, even recording something on Zoom nowadays, you get a transcript, right? And we have transcription tools that can divide up who's talking. And so if I just even put my phone and recorded an entire session in audio in the middle of the room, I could sort of measure who's talking the most, who's talking the least, sentiment analysis. I mean, there are tools we can literally use today to do that. And so that's really cool. We're also getting a ton of questions here about, wow, is this all available in Docebo now? Like, you're talking about all this awesome stuff. And I know, Maija, some of this is future forward, right? There might be stuff that you're working on now. Maybe there are certain, metrics that we can start to engage. We saw the SCORM metrics. Right. And I think we'll talk about being able to gather more rich data in the future. But because this question came up like 7 times in the last 5 minutes, I thought you might want to address it right now. You know what I mean?
Right. So this is something that we're looking to get into people's hands in terms of like the right data in the right place, the right kind of reporting. I personally am working on a product that is not yet available to the public. So we're in closed beta testing right now. And these are the things that my team is chasing down and trying to put together inside that. So that's what I can say about what we have coming is a lot of this.
Yeah, but I think also, and this is an important aspect and something I think we get to closer to the end of our presentation, but you're still limited by the tool, by what you're using to create the content, right? Yes. And so, for instance, we saw what SCORM is able to capture. So if SCORM can only capture these things, it might not be able to pass it off to my LMS, or I need to start relying on my LMS and other tools to fill that in. And so I think that might be somewhat of the gap here, and maybe even a point for everyone on the webinar to start thinking about is how can I get ahead of that? So when tools like what Maija's talking about come out, I'm ready to go. And there was also a great question, and then I'm going to go ahead and move on for now because we have so much more to talk about. But it was about how about ESL, English as a second language learners, or accessibility issues and all of these things. And I think those are all really valid things to consider, and something we need to consider in general with AI is that we are dealing with a diversity of learners. We probably could statistically see certain bell curves, right, that would statistically sort of measure out. But I think it's also important to acknowledge, what you were talking about this, this sort of personal, this individual data set we get on a profile, which is that profile and the ability to go individual. And I think we'll talk about maybe how to think about that in a bit, is going to help us think past that, right? Because we can't look at everyone as a monolith, right? And we know that AI naturally is biased because of the data it's in, although we'll also talk about that, right? So Maija, do you have anything to say about that before I go ahead and move on?
Yeah, so specifically talking about English language learners, I personally have a background in language education. And so actually it's something that I think about quite a bit, like what the experience would be for language learners. And I kind of, in my natural product design process, integrate some of those things inside. And my team also has similar backgrounds. So I think that's something that Docebo actually has special on our AI team, is a lot of people with language learning backgrounds where we can leverage some of these skills. The other thing about accessibility is we really do focus as a company, Docebo, on accessibility. We make sure that that's an important part of our development process. And we have a person and testers who are like entirely focused on accessibility for our products. So that's another important thing.
Yeah, and just the last thing, I'm neurodiverse, right? So I was diagnosed in a surprise diagnosis a couple of years ago. And one thing that occurs to me is if I have more options, which I think we're going to talk about next, with how to learn, it helps me get over some of the stuff that, like, I have a lot of trouble going through a standard e-learning course and clicking through stuff. I basically can't pay attention, right?
Yeah.
I also think about, by the way, AI just helping in the sense that it can translate in the moment, right? It can
Yes.
adapt in the moment. And I think that gets to this next thing we want to talk about, which is how do we rethink developing learning experiences in the age of AI? And if you're
Right.
not following a guy named Ethan Mollick and Lilac Mollick, you need to, right? He's a professor at Wharton School. And if you follow his LinkedIn, new insights every day. It's probably the #1 source of information for me. But one of the recent papers he came out with proposed 7 different roles for AI in a learning experience. And I wanted to walk through these because I actually think this helps us redefine and think differently about how we use AI. We don't want to just use AI to create content faster, quicker, cheaper. We can do that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. But what I'm saying is we really want to get to those results, right? We want to see we want to not just put an engine into a horse and buggy, we want to create a vehicle, right? A car. So here are the 7 roles. I want to walk through them real quickly because some of them are slightly different. And then we'll talk about maybe how this all comes together. So the first is AI tutor. So that is the AI teaching you, right? And we know that with AI, it can adapt to your learner profile. It can adapt to how you're asking it. Right now, you go into ChatGPT or your generative AI tool of choice, and you can have a discussion and it's sort of adapting in the moment to you. And that falls into this pedagogical, or by the way, just Maija and I had a whole discussion for anyone who was thinking about it, about whether we should use pedagogical or andragogical. I love andragogical. Maija sort of didn't care. We decided it was a semantic argument. She's used to using the term pedagogical. So we said, okay, we'll go ahead and use pedagogical. But just so you know, we did talk about andragogical. I'm a big Malcolm Knowles guy. So we have the AI tutor. Then we have the mentor, right? And that is slightly similar, but instead of teaching you up front, that is the one giving you feedback as you're going through, right? So watching maybe your interactions with all these other roles and telling you, oh, maybe try this, maybe try that, maybe do this, maybe do that. The next one is the AI as a tool. So this is, you are using AI in a certain moment to do something, right? And AI, for instance, is being integrated into all our tools. If you use a CRM, it's being integrated into your CRM. We're on Zoom right now. There's an AI summary companion, right? And so this is the tool that's helping you do the tasks. And we need to think about this because we think about learning in the moment, right? We can't just think of learning as an event. We need to start thinking of learning holistically as not just a start and stop thing, but your entire environment, everything you're doing. Maija, you're jumping in. Yeah.
Learning in the flow of work. Remember
In
we
the flow
talked
of
about
work.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably what I meant to say, but the coffee hasn't hit yet. Right. And then we think about, and then we think about AI as simulator. We've used simulators now, but it's amazing to me how much more dynamic and less artificial they are going to be able to become. For instance, we're going to move past very quickly branching scenarios to what I call dynamic scenarios, which are scenarios that change in the moment to what you need. I'm doing actually a presentation at Training Magazine at the end of the month or next week on that topic. So if you happen to be there, let me know. And I often say, and I just got to say it because I'm a kind of a Star Trek fan, original series, the most ideal simulator, right, is the Kobayashi Maru. If you don't know it, this was Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, and there's this simulator wherein, you face the unwinnable scenario, right? So you're the captain of the ship, you're surrounded by enemies, and you're going to lose no matter what, right? So you're facing death, for instance. And by doing the simulation, right, then it allows you in the moment of crisis to be a little more calm because you've gone through this, right? You physically have felt it. I think we see this with, if you think about airplanes, and you've heard any of the recordings of some people doing these crash landings, right? They don't sound like they're freaking out. They sound calm and collected. I recently talked to a large financial institution, and they had a robbery at one of their locations, and they credited their virtual reality simulation with actually making it so that everyone felt good, was not as emotionally scarred, and fortunately no one was injured outside the folks perpetrating, right? So these are sort of four that I think we're used to. These next three for me were sort of like, I don't want to say shocking, but they sort of made me rethink everything I think about with AI. So the first is AI teammate, right? So we are taking material and knowledge and behaviors, but when we go back to our work, or if we're even going back to work, if perhaps it's the learning is just part of work, so we're not going back, we're sort of there, we're going to use those skills with other people. So why not begin by making AI agents or AI teammates that I can start working with and practice how well am I able to do something with an AI teammate? The second one, and this I love so much, AI student. We always say, right, oh, the way to, you really learn something and you really know something is you're able to teach it to someone else. But I had never thought about creating an AI agent or bot, or your term of choice, that I had to teach it as the learner, and then I was measured on whether it passed the assessment, right? If I already have the assessment, perhaps it's so simple as simply changing and saying I have the assessment, but I'm not going to be measured on me passing it. I'm going to be measured on this AI student passing it. I mean, if that's not blowing your mind.
Very possible today, which is
Yeah.
kind of the amazing thing.
Yeah.
This buildable, this is possible.
Yeah, it's totally buildable. And by the way, you have a content creation tool like Lectora, which is my favorite, or Storyline, or any of these others. You can use variables, right? You use an API key with GPT, and you can create these interactive bots, right? Capturing the information may be slightly more difficult in our current infrastructure, but you can also have it send out to an external database, and you can still capture that data for when you're able to use it. And this final one was AI coach. And this isn't the coach in the sense that you're being coached on the field, and someone's giving you very specific feedback like the mentor. This is a coach that's helping you with metacognition. So helping you think about what's the next task you do, asking you those grow model questions, right? Even helping you maybe challenge what you're being told by the AI tutor and the AI mentor. And we know learning how to learn is one of the best things we can do to improve our ability to learn, even if I just learn a little bit more about how my brain works. And so for me, this AI coach is also fascinating. Sorry, Maija.
I just wanted to say frameworks are what we
Yeah.
also talked about with this. The AI coach can help someone establish a mental framework for something so that
Yeah.
they can better navigate it.
Yeah. I think, you know, these to me really help me rethink how I might think about a learning design, because learning design is going to feed directly into what metrics I'm going to measure and how I'm going to measure the success of it. And so just to sort of lay out what this might look like, imagine that in our traditional model, and again, I'm oversimplifying here, so forgive me, but I got my MBA through Coursera, right? And we had to take a digital marketing course. And imagine that in that digital marketing course, and this is what I did, right? I had courses, I had video lectures, text-based materials, I was turning in stuff, I had activities, right? I would turn in things, I would get assessed on them, and then I went through like a final exam or a final project. And that was it. I got my grade, I got my credits, and I was done. And in a lot of our organizations, this is also how we do stuff, right? You go to your leadership course, perhaps there's some ongoing stuff, but at some point there's a culminating event and the learning ends, right? I foresee a new generation. I think we both foresee a new generation of learning experiences. So you have an AI tutor that basically takes you on a personalized role of learning, right? And when it's doing that, you're getting information on the learning paths, how they're being taught, what they're learning, how, you know, what they're asking back, et cetera, et cetera. That goes into this whole other cycle where you have a simulator where they're applying this stuff. You have tools they're using while they're applying it. They're being tasked with teaching AI students, right, how to use this. They're using this information with AI teams. And this is all going back into the tutor in order to help teach the next thing, right? Or to teach more, or to teach the next person, whatever that is. But we start seeing this holistic cycle of learning development, which literally doesn't end. And at some point, we start seeing a blurring between the simulator, the simulation, and the real life, especially with stuff like our AI tools, which, if you think about it, I can have a tool. We've developed one of these internally. I can have a tool that helps me, for instance, write emails and role play in the course of work that also has coaching in it. And I don't have to go to another thing. And when I start thinking about that, Maija, right, we start thinking about there's no real beginning or end. We get to what us as learning and development professionals have always said we should be doing, which is it's not an event, it's an overall experience. It starts the day you're hired and ends perhaps when they finish, right? And maybe even extends past that.
Yeah, and I've been talking about this a lot with skills being the thread that can be used to really bring that learning experience into connection with the hiring process, how job roles are defined, things like that. So we can bring a data pathway all the way through into learning content of any type, learning experiences of any type, and have that be the way that we talk about learning in our organizations.
Yeah, because with each of these simulator, we can be grabbing, where are they looking? What are they clicking on? What are the paths they're clicking through?
Why? And we can predict things, we can have flags and decisions, and we can set standards and thresholds for these interactions so that we can identify which ones are edge cases and which ones need to be addressed, where something's not performing well. This works for data for the learner, but it also works for data for the learning experience developer.
Yeah, and I think some examples of maybe how we're starting to see this, right, come about, and how we can almost link this into real world situations, right? So the training starts to blur with reality. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this is an example of some AI generated feedback that was given after a virtual role play that we're developing. So this is meant to be formative feedback that's part of a developmental loop where the learner is learning how to give an elevator pitch about Docebo. And we capture that interaction in the free-form virtual role play that doesn't have any set structure to it, except for the intent of what the conversation should be, and then the background information for both the learner and for the AI counterpart. What we have here is a quote from that experience that we are using large language models to evaluate how effective that quote would be in comparison to language used in successful sales calls for our organization. So this is something I want to be clear here that we are, as Docebo, we're not retraining models with client data without consent. None of that is happening. But this is an example where we were able to take recorded sales calls. We were able to take a look at the phrasing, the vocabulary, things like that through large language model use. And then we're able to rephrase that, explain to the learner why this rephrased version is better. And then we give them the opportunity to go back and have the same experience again, have a unique experience in this virtual role play, and see how well they were able to implement this. And I think this is a great example because the band score here was good, meaning that overall the impact was pretty good for this learner, but we're still able to give them something constructive that's just a rephrasing of what they've done. It's a low lift for them to remember this. And it's great to be able to give specific examples instead of only descriptive feedback.
Yeah, and it occurs to me two things. One is I have to know I have to start capturing now if I'm going to use something like this in the future, or maybe today, but I have to start capturing conversations now in my daily work so I know which ones are good sales and which ones aren't. Right? Because eventually if I'm going to have a rubric, for instance, that I'm going to be able to put into a platform like Docebo or into my choice creation tool, I am going to need to know and have that information available. So starting to think about that now allows me to prepare for this world in many ways.
And there are many tools available that do this and bring AI value while they record calls.
Right. Yeah. And so then we're even seeing the merging of the training to this, because this never has to end. Yes. I can constantly get this feedback every day, so to speak, or this can be sent to a manager every day. And so the learning is not an event. It starts to say, right, or this information is sent to an AI coach or an AI mentor, right? And then that is being trained consistently. Yes. And this isn't the only one, right? You also have this descriptive sort of explanation.
So I talked about before how that's a specific example. It fits really well, especially with someone who's doing well, but we want to help them out a little bit more. Here's an example of where we've seen someone who's not performing well. So this virtual role play took place after somebody received some input and where they were given structure and recommendations for how to give an elevator pitch. In this case, the learner reversed the order of the value proposition and the pain point. And this was an explanation where this is something that we would do as observers of a role play, for example. We would give this type of feedback where we say, I saw that you performed this action first and this action second. We recommended that you do it the opposite direction. The AI is easily able to give this same type of feedback, which allows the user to just go back and repeat the experience and improve over time.
And I think it's important to add, this is cheap. I mean, relatively cheap to do because the AI can do it at scale immediately, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so being able to start using these tools this way, right? And I think it's also important to add, and Maija, we're still getting that question about how does this implement with Docebo today? and can it, and is that stuff there? You said earlier you're in some closed betas and other stuff. So I think is the lesson here to say this is coming, start to prepare your data, prepare your rubrics, prepare your stuff, because you are going to be able to use your tools in these new AI. I mean, I know we use at ELB, right, learning, we use these AI roles to think about how we're conceptualizing, creating training in the future. And I think what you're laying out here too is here are the data points to keep in mind, because here's what you're going to be able to measure soon.
Absolutely.
Or even now using different tools. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of preparation, having rubrics in place for human assessment, I know that you feel like you maybe should, but maybe sometimes some interactions, rubrics don't exist. Those are really helpful when trying to train tools to give similar types of feedback. So having those descriptive rubrics, having examples attached to each rubric score would be really helpful. These are all things that would help AI learn. You can also start to work on organizing your information in a thoughtful way. And I think we'll circle around to that again at the end. But the sources of truth, especially for training, rely on the quality of data and documentation. So that's a great way to get yourself prepared.
Yeah. And all this data is going to go someplace, right? And by the way, I think we're starting to see here that once I start seeing how they're learning, this affects behaviors, and the behaviors go back and affect how I can help them in what they're learning, right? So instead of having a linear cycle, I think we've always wanted this starts to become a sort of virtuous cycle, if you will, a flywheel, as we used to say at Amazon, of learning, where the real behaviors and the learning behaviors almost become one, right?
Yeah.
In some sort of weird Borg fashion.
Exactly.
And, you know, some of the metrics that I think we put together, you know, with these, so with a tutor, how long does it take them to achieve certain objectives? How does their performance change over time? I think these are things you can measure now, right? You can measure performance in a quiz or something, and then you can have them take it again, and we can track, you know, if globally or even individually, how much that's happening. If we have something like a mentor in the future, or even you have a tool right now, how often are they clicking into it, right? Do we see changes in performance following this? Which means, by the way, we need to be capturing data in their flow of work. This is very easy with stuff like CRM, Salesforce, HubSpot, et cetera, because I can start to see these things. But are there other tools I can start putting into place where in work I can be capturing their phone calls? I can be measuring, are they saying certain keywords, right? Can I get their managers perhaps to start doing certain surveys? Can I be rolling out surveys more frequently in order to capture more information, right? When we look at the simulators, how quickly they are completing this, what choices are they making? What are their decision pathways? With the tool, you know, how often do they use it? How long do they use it? How are they using it, right? Is it effective? Are they more effective using a tool or not? I think is something interesting that we sometimes don't think about, but we can think about that in an A/B test in our learning environments. What if I give them a tool, or I do one path for some or one path for both, or even I evolve, right? So I have data from before and I can evolve and now give them access to a tool in the course of their learning. Does that change the learning results? That's an interesting metric. And to what extent does it change the results, right? Teammate, right? If I have an AI teammate, how often am I interacting with the teammate? What are the quality of those interactions, which again, AI can give us. If I ask that AI, the teammate itself, what was the quality of this interaction? It can actually tell me that. Just like with the tool, the success of these joint problem solvings. I love this idea of the coach, which is really focused on critical thinking, right? What are the interactions? Do I take actions post this? These are all things we naturally would do with our manager coaches, right? And then student, right? I think, you know, what are the responses I'm giving? Is the student able to pass the quiz that I'm creating, right? Is the AI student able to pass that quiz? I think that's a fascinating metric that should be explored. Everyone has assessments and quizzes right now, and it would not be hard to take those quizzes, create an AI agent, and simply say, hey, student, you are nascent, you are a sycophant, right? You know nothing, and this person has to teach you, and then you're going to pass the quiz and see how well they do it or they don't do it, and then give that feedback back to the learner to say you have to keep improving. And I think we start to also see these different areas. Right now, we're not just measuring knowledge, we're measuring their improvement over time, how they're applying stuff, the efficiency, et cetera. And you had this great slide here, right, where the student profile is in the center. Do you want to talk about this? And this gets that individual learning.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you talked about the flywheel of learning, and we talked a lot about how data is coming from a lot of different directions now. And I think the details of this are not super important, but it's important to take a look at these kind of categories of directions that we could be pulling insights from. And you'll see that at the center of this is the student profile or the learner profile. So what we're really able to do now is collect all of this data that's available in some form, in some type of interaction that is tracked, and we're able to pin it to the learner. Now, we may see this as something that we may want to look at individually to understand more about the learner, but the key here is that this should be the driving force behind personalization, because every data point that you collect from every one of these areas, asynchronous content, instructor-led training, any kind of review, testing, interactions that are recorded, anything that's digitally available, essentially, will help us make better decisions for that learner. So that means if we're trying to deliver something to them, we can make sure that we deliver the right piece. It means that if we're able to adapt something, it means that we're adapting it in the most effective way to achieve the results that we're looking for. And as we develop the richness of the learner profile and student profile, it's really just going to empower more and more decision-making and more hyper-personalized experiences for the learner.
And this, it occurs to me, this can be done today in some way, shape, or form. If you have an LMS like Docebo, right, you have reports. You can export those reports. You can export reports from, whatever other tools you have, right? Your skills taxonomies, your CRMs, your HRSs. And so long as you have your legal and security things in place with a generative AI tool, you can ask the generative AI tool to do some analysis for you and start to link these and even create some sort of measurement, right? You also, if you have a team that focuses on this, that can also help. But what I loved about this is you had this, and then I had my sort of flywheel of the AI stuff, and I realized, like, wow, this actually starts to look similar, right? You have what you say is asynchronous content and placement tests and level tests, which is sort of what we have today, all feeding into a learner profile. In the future, we can think less about these pieces of content or these single points in time and think more about these AI roles as taking those shapes, right? So the asynchronous content becomes the AI tutor, right? The placement test becomes the AI simulator, et cetera, right? And so we've talked, I think, and this was something also I think we were, getting to, and Josh Burson put this out. It comes from, I think, Wiley as well. But this idea of eventually, if we have all of these data points and we have individual profiles, we can move towards a fully autonomous learning experience, right? And I know Docebo is getting there, right? And so one of the few,
we're at the forefront of what's possible, and we're just trying to build the right things.
Yeah, which takes time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really does. It takes time, thoughtfulness, and expertise, which
So we've talked very esoterically about a lot of stuff. We painted a story of the future, but what can you do as soon as you leave today? We broke this up into three roles, into three categories. And I think this is probably the stuff that, you can do right now. There's something about data, gathering and organizing it. There's something about thinking differently about yourselves and ourselves as learning and, learning developers. And there's also this idea of you just need to start using generative AI. You need to take that data out of Docebo and you need to throw it into an AI and start to think about stuff. Do you want to talk about the data ones real quickly? Because a lot of these you very smartly, right, we're talking about. So do you want to really quickly
Sure.
go through those three? And I acknowledge we have 5 minutes left here. So
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea here is everyone needs to have the right data to make the right decisions. So that means we need to start somewhere by thinking about the data we have access to, whether it's accurate and how we might use it. And then we need to think about low-hanging fruit for what other data we can start to collect and go in a thoughtful way to collect more and more richer and richer data. The other important thing that I talked about before was knowledge management. This will become more and more important as we see retrieval augmented generation tools that are using generative AI and relying on a knowledge bank for a source of truth. And then also we'll have to take a look at whether the protocols we're using to collect data are the right ones. So for example, if you're collecting data using SCORM, learning data using SCORM right now, can you shift to XAPI, and what would that look like? XAPI can do a lot of this, all of the same things SCORM can, plus a lot more. How does that richness move you forward in these data-oriented tools?
right, because I need if I can gather more rich data, then I'm going to have more data to use when I start rethinking everything, right?
And it will be well organized, and you'll
Because you're
know
doing
where it
knowledge
comes
management.
from.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I also think you need to evolve your role, right? We need to evolve ourselves as instructional designers. At some point, we became the creators of courses and courseware, and we started spending a lot of time in, content developing tools. And it used to be, I remember, right, teaching this back in the day, it used to be instructional systems design, ISD, right? And we need to return to that. We need to go back to this thought of we are not just putting content out there. We are changing behaviors and producing results. We are not a cost center. We are a developer of ROI in our organizations. And there's two ways I think we can really hone into this other than going back and rereading all of our, formative texts. One is if you have experience in data, dive further into it. If you don't, start taking those courses on data analytics and data, right? We need to become data experts so that we can push the conversation forward. And when we're talking about that conversation, we need to reframe what we do with our stakeholders. No longer is it okay to simply say, when they say, give me an hour training, for us to say, great. We need to say why, and we need to push them on, will that be valuable? Training is money. Know they're spending money and they would love to save it. If we can create an experience that is shorter, that is more effective, I guarantee they will be good with it. They just don't have the framework for it. And that is our job, right? And as I say at the bottom, because I think it goes across all of these, use the data we're gathering, right, on the left, and then on the right, when we're using generative AI to get that buy-in, because nothing is going to move a stakeholder more than than data, right? And the last part here is use generative AI, right? You need to go out and start using it. It's in everything. It's in our, Excel. It's in PowerPoint. You have a million different generative AI tools. Also, cultivate your creativity. Go read something. Go draw something. Being creative, it's not about can you use AI, it's that can you think big enough, right? Can you think grand enough to reimagine how you are going to use AI? Which is really gets to this last point, which is don't just think about thinking outside the box. You need to throw away the box and think of a different box. And the only way to do that is to return to your ISD roots, look at the data, right? And start thinking about your organization from a different way. And I'll just throw out there, I know that ELB Learning, we have workshops. We run our, IQ, our discovery workshops, which are really focused on helping you use generative AI and also helping you rethink how you use AI in your organizations. And what we've seen is once we get in there and start sharing this information and the organizations start using it, it almost becomes a waterfall effect. And our learning and development folks become the stars of the show because they were the ones with the insight to see it. Your behavior experts, right? Maija, I think we talked about this, right?
Yeah, I just love the opportunity that this gives to people who are really interested in diving into the technology aspects and the data aspects. This is
Well, and
thrilling.
learning and development professionals are behavior experts.
Yes.
AI is replicating human behavior.
Yeah.
You are the best equipped right now to use and move generative AI forward. I know we went right up to time, Stephanie. I don't know if there are other questions we can respond to or comments. I'm happy to do it via email, or I can stay on for a little bit here and respond if other folks are, although I see everyone dropping off as well. So
Yes. Wow. I feel like Josh and Maija could have talked for another hour about this.
Sure.
It was at one point I was like, do they know what time it is? Thank you so much. Yes, I know we have been keeping pretty on top of the questions. I think there were a few asking if, how do we track this, not just in the LMS, but in the real world? What's the best way to track and analyze this data? Is it XAPI? Is it something else? I don't know if that's something we can touch on super fast or if we want to put that in the follow-up.
we can put it in the follow-up, but I think, Maija, we talked at the very beginning, right, about just record your live things, put cameras in there. Even if you can start doing that to capture very raw data, at some point, you can take that and run it through AI to transfer that into structured data. And then you can take that and go through it and make sure that you have knowledge management and you're marking what is correct. So I think, again, right now, my thought, and Maija was like, don't just capture any data, capture important data. But I also think capture as much data as possible that you can, and then you'll be able to use it, right? Maija, sounds like you're on mute. I don't know if that's...
Yeah. The only thing is, like, don't overwhelm yourself, because sometimes, like, for example, using XAPI, it's very easy to generate huge amounts of data. And unless you have a plan for putting it somewhere and organizing it, it can become really overwhelming. So just thinking about how much data you'll produce from a particular plan is important. And if you're working at scale with people doing behavioral things, be prepared for where you're going to put it and how you're going to find it.
Yeah. As far as processing it right now, I would literally take whatever data sources you have, I would export those files, I would make sure it's okay with your organization, and I would go to ChatGPT or whatever, and use it. And
You
just
can do a
measure
lot
it.
with a transcript.
Yeah, transcripts, yeah. So I know we're getting some calls to shut it down. So any other questions we'll pay attention to, and we can respond in emails too. So I think that's the way to do it.
Yes, we've got all the questions, so I'll share those with our presenters so that we can get everything answered. The recording and the slides will be sent out to everyone. Thank you so much, everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Maija. Thank you, Josh, for sharing all of this. And hopefully we'll see you all on another webinar soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.